Welcome to Y-Stick. You're standing at 10,000 feet. The air is thin enough that every breath takes effort. Your legs are burning after 5 hours of climbing. Then you look down into the lake in front of you, water so clear it looks unreal, and something moves beneath the surface. A fish. Up here. You freeze for a second, trying to work out how a creature that needs water its entire life ended up at the top of a mountain, surrounded by cliffs, with no river connecting this lake to anything below. But the real answer is far stranger than you think. Most high mountain lakes, left alone by nature, have no fish in them at all. Not because fish don't want to live there, because they physically can't get there. These lakes usually formed after glaciers carved out the landscape and then retreated thousands of years ago, leaving behind small pools of meltwater sealed off by waterfalls or vertical rock walls no fish could ever swim up. Scientists estimate that before humans got involved, somewhere around 99% of high alpine lakes in mountain ranges like the Sierra Nevada were completely fishless. For tens of thousands of years, most of these lakes existed as empty little worlds underwater. Just insects, algae, tiny crustaceans, and the occasional stubborn frog that hopped in and figured out how to survive the winter. So where did the fish you just saw actually come from? The answer, most of the time, is a plane. That's not a metaphor. Starting in the mid-20th century, wildlife agencies across the western United States launched a program with a very literal name: aerial fish stalking. Small fixed-wing planes flew low over remote mountain basins, opened a hatch built into the belly of the aircraft, and dropped thousands of baby trout, sometimes barely an inch long, straight into lakes that had never had fish swimming in them before. In states like California, Idaho, and Utah, this wasn't some rare experiment. It became routine summer work, repeated year after year, decade after decade. The goal was simple, and honestly kind of charming in its short-sightedness. Turn remote wilderness that took a full day of hiking to reach into a weekend fishing paradise for anyone willing to make the climb. For decades, almost nobody stopped to ask whether that was a good idea. Fish swam, people fished, everybody posed for a photo holding up their catch at the end of the day. It might be one of the only moments in human history where dropping a foreign species into a completely isolated ecosystem was treated as a brilliant idea instead of the opening scene of a disaster movie. Then, toward the end of the 20th century, scientists started noticing something odd. Ecologist Roland Knapp, working out of the Sierra Nevada Aquatic Research Laboratory, noticed that lakes with fish were almost completely missing a species that used to be everywhere up there: the mountain yellow-legged frog. Together with researcher Vance Vredenburg, he began surveying hundreds of lakes across the range, one by one, comparing lakes with fish to lakes that had never been touched by a stocking program. The results were clear, and a little brutal if you happened to be. In lakes where trout had been introduced, frog populations collapsed within just a few generations. The fish ate the tadpoles before they ever grew legs, before they ever had a chance to hop away. A food web that had run undisturbed for thousands of years, with zero aquatic predators in it, got quietly torn apart in a handful of summers, by a species that had absolutely no idea it wasn't supposed to be there. Researcher Kathleen Matthews, working alongside Knapp in a study published in the early 2000s, found that the damage didn't stop with the frogs. Birds, snakes, and other animals that once relied on those frogs as a food source thinned out around the affected lakes too, sometimes disappearing from areas where they'd been common for generations. A decision that seemed completely harmless, just dropping a few fish in for a fun afternoon of fishing, had quietly rewritten the ecological rulebook for an entire mountain range, one lake at a time. Picture inviting a new roommate into your apartment because they seemed friendly enough at first glance. 3 months later, they've eaten everything in the shared fridge, changed the Wi-Fi password, and somehow their name is now on the lease. That's roughly what a trout does to a mountain lake, just slower and with fewer awkward conversations. Here's the stranger part. The survival instincts of these fish haven't changed at all from their ancestors tens of millions of years ago. They have no idea they are in the wrong place, at the wrong altitude, in the wrong ecosystem entirely. To a trout, a lake is just a lake. Cold water, food available, that's more than enough to survive and reproduce. Evolution never gave them a reason to care whether the frogs were there first. Humans were the only species that ever stopped, 70 years later, to ask whether any of this should have happened in the first place. And this isn't just an American story. In the European Alps, researchers documented the exact same pattern across hundreds of glacial lakes, where brown trout and brook trout were introduced starting as early as the 19th century. First for small-scale local fish farming, later growing into a booming tourist fishing industry that shaped how entire alpine towns marketed themselves. Same script, different continent, different language, different species of trout, same quiet consequences underwater. It's worth pointing out that fish do occasionally reach isolated lakes on their own, without any human help at all. Floods can temporarily connect waterways during extreme weather. Fish eggs can, in rare cases, stick to the feet or feathers of wading birds and get carried short distances between bodies of water. But these events are astonishingly rare, and they almost never happen at the kind of altitude where a plane can simply skip the problem entirely and deliver a few thousand fish in one afternoon. There's an added twist to the frog story that most hikers never hear. Mountain yellow-legged frogs used to be so numerous in some Sierra basins that early surveyors described stepping over them by the dozen along the shoreline. Within a couple of generations of stocking, some of those same lakes had 0 frogs left. Not fewer. 0. A population that had survived ice ages, droughts, and predators for tens of thousands of years was wiped out locally in less time than it takes a house to be fully paid off. Nature, it turns out, is remarkably resilient to almost everything except a well-organized human plan with good intentions. The fish, for what it's worth, were never the villains here. It's tempting to imagine a cartoon trout twirling a mustache, plotting the downfall of the amphibian population. But that's not what happened. The trout simply did what trout have always done, which is eat anything small enough to fit in their mouths and keep swimming. The actual decision, the one with intent behind it, the one that could have paused to ask a question first, belonged entirely to the people loading crates onto a plane. Today, several national parks, including Yosemite and Kings Canyon, have started actively reversing the process their predecessors set in motion. Wildlife managers remove fish from selected high lakes using repeated netting across multiple seasons, carefully controlled fish toxins applied under strict environmental review, and in smaller lakes, sometimes just draining them entirely. All of it just to restore the underwater silence that existed there long before the first plane ever flew over that particular ridge. You rarely think about any of this while standing next to a beautiful mountain lake, phone out, snapping a photo for later. But the flat, glassy water you're admiring might be the direct result of an administrative decision made 70 years ago by someone who never thought past next summer's fishing season, let alone the next 70 years. And here's the part worth sitting with a little longer. This isn't really a story about fish. It's a story about how humans, throughout history, keep reshaping nature to fit an immediate want, without ever pausing to ask whether the ecosystem actually needed a new species dropped into it, and only realizing the real cost generations later, once the people who made the original decision are long gone. Did you just think of some harmless decision of your own? You do the exact same thing every day, just on a much smaller scale with no airplane required. You add a new app to your phone because it looked fun to try for 5 minutes. A few months later, it's quietly reshaping how you spend your free time, how you sleep, even how you think about yourself when nobody's watching. Nobody's dropping fish into your life from 10,000 feet, but you're doing something remarkably similar to yourself every single day and barely know. Your brain, like the ecosystem of a mountain lake, isn't built to notice a small change accumulating into a large one. It only registers the final result once everything has already settled into a new order, long after the old one has quietly disappeared without anyone around to mourn it. Think about how many habits you're currently living inside that you never actually chose on purpose. A scrolling routine before bed. A snack you reach for without deciding. A version of your own schedule that somebody else, or something else, dropped into place while you were busy focusing on something more urgent that week. None of it arrived with a warning label. It just landed quietly, the way a crate of fingerlings lands in a lake nobody was watching that afternoon, and by the time anyone notices, it's already part of the landscape. Next time you're standing at 10,000 feet, looking down into a lake so clear it looks unreal, and you see a shadow move beneath the surface, you'll know it isn't some random miracle of nature. It's the leftover trace of a human decision, flown in over a ridge a long time ago, still quietly swimming beneath the melting ice, waiting patiently for you to finally notice. If you want to keep understanding yourself, subscribe. And if you watched this far, what do you want to understand next?